everyone. It's good to have you with us for this event.
Anyway, hey everybody, welcome to Addict to Athlete Overtime. This is our weekly show that we like to put on, answer questions from you, the viewers and listeners. And as always, this podcast will be rebroadcast to all of the major platforms, whatever podcast platform you listen to, a little bit later. So maybe you're catching this live right now and, you know, boss is walking by, you got to duck and cover. Don't worry, you'll be able to hear the rest of this podcast later this week. That being said, yeah, everybody, welcome. So glad to have you here. Marissa,
yes,
we have this awesome platform called Patreon.
Yes, Patreon is a fundraising platform. It helps us gain the needed funds to be able to keep this podcast going and helping it move forward. And you can become a Patreon follower of our podcast if you go to patreon.com/addictoathlete. There are multiple tiers. You can start at $2 a month. You can pay for a year and even get a discount. So, and being a Patreon, you get bonus episodes, special content, like exclusive gear. So
Yeah.
we want to thank our Patreon subscribers, the super fans, Karen Hardy, Steve Riggs, Jerem Thurston, Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Chris Williams, Sensei KP Brown, Patrick Forsyth, Brock Ellerman, Christy Case, Kel Lim, and Faith Davis. Thank you, our super fans. Our rookie levels is Earl Dyer, Wendell Wood, Brad Waldron, Ron and D. Loesch, and Sione and Mary Inuk. I want to thank our pro level is Justin Robbins, and our champion Patreons, Chef and Freya Robinson and Andrew Baird. Thank you, Patreon.
Yeah, you guys, the Patreon platform allows us to give you something back, and it is all the efforts that you guys are putting into it. It helps us get this podcast out a little bit further. So while you're listening to the podcast, jump on and leave us a review as well. That helps a ton, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
$2 a month. You can get all the backlogged episodes too.
Yep.
Good
There's
stuff
lots
there.
of good stuff on there, and it helps us.
Mm-hmm. Hey, as always, too, I want to thank everybody so far that's been contributing to the Project Elf Fund. Yeah, we got a little bit of camera following. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
This is some new update on the platform.
Yeah,
So thank
in case we make a quick exit stage left, it's going to follow us. So don't worry about that. Nonetheless, today we got some great topics too. Specifically some questions that we haven't really discussed, which is funny because Addict to Athlete is primarily a recovery-based program, but we deal a lot with mental health, with family systems, communication, parent-child relationships, all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
Me being a licensed mental health therapist and a licensed addictions counselor, Marissa being a licensed therapeutic recreational therapist, there are some cool things that we get to discuss and talk about. We've got some background in all these things, but we had a question from a listener, Marissa, that wanted to know more about recognizing addiction. Like, how do I know if I have an addiction? And I kind of like this question because it gets back to some of the roots that we've talked about.
Yeah.
But even more importantly, it talks a little bit about, like, how do we recognize for sure it's an addiction? There's a lot of things that we find, like, I'm addicted to, playing video games, or I'm addicted to, going to Sodalicious for a drink or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We have
People
these,
throw out the word a lot.
they throw out the word addiction a lot,
Yeah.
and it kind of demeans the severity of it to a certain degree, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
But do we really recognize, do we know what actually being addicted to something, right? We have a Addict to Athlete pornography group here, and a lot of times we have a difficult time expressing what addiction to pornography is because it's not classified as a DSM diagnosis, which means that you cannot be diagnosed with a pornography addiction.
Yeah.
It's a behavior, so it's more of a compulsion.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, I'm curious, recognizing addiction can be complex.
Yeah.
And there are some common sites and some indicators that can show that it's present. And I'd say the first one is, do you notice a craving or a compulsive behavior, right?
Yeah.
That's that strong urge to or craving to engage in a particular activity, to consume a substance. And you might find it difficult to control or stop like the behavior despite the negative consequences, right? Because negative consequences always come.
Yeah. So that's kind of the overarching description, right? Is compulsion and something that you can't really stop doing on your own, even despite negative consequences. And what are some of those negative consequences?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to be, say it's shopping. It's going to be like racking up credit card debt and you can't stop but you can't pay it off, things like that. So there's a lot of different things.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about number 2.
Okay.
What do you think? Because number 2 here is a big one. And what is the difference between them? Because this is how you identify addiction.
Okay. So number 2 is tolerance and withdrawal. So with tolerance, you need to increase the amount of the substance or the behavior to achieve the same desired effect. And then if you don't have that substance or you don't participate in that behavior or activity, then you experience uncomfortable physical or psychological symptoms when trying to step down or stop or, cut out that use. So if you're looking at eating, like if you feel like, okay, I do have an addiction to eating, if you try to cut it out, do you have to build a tolerance by eating more to get the same, euphoria from eating and trying to suppress emotions? And then also, do you have withdrawals when you try to cut it out? And some of that is going to be physical and some psychological. So like we're saying, this could be substances of legal or illegal, but also behaviors like pornography or gambling or shopping. Lots of different differences there. Did you fix it?
Yeah.
All right. Number 3.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about tolerance and withdrawal that I really want to impress upon your minds is that's the biggest indicator on if you have a legitimate problem. Typically what we see in addiction, and the old DSM-4, I think explained it really well. I think the new DSM, you get too many people that want to change things and they muck it all up.
Yeah.
But if your tolerance increases, meaning it's used more, like you said, then we have a problem, right? And this happens with all kinds of things, sleeping medications. I know there's a lot of people that take sleeping medications and now they can't sleep at all unless they have this substance, right? Whether it's Ambien
or even simple as like Benadryl,
melatonin, all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so, my kids do this a lot. Oh, I can't sleep. I'm not tired. Well, it's because you're not doing enough in the day, right? You've got to get up and get moving.
And if you have done that, your body, so you've built a tolerance within your body, but your body has also quit producing its own melatonin or whatever to help you get sleep tired so that you can sleep throughout the day. So it's going to have a big change if you decide to quit using that substance or whatever. Then also to be able to increase your own activity so that you are getting more tired throughout the day as well.
Precisely. So now let's look at tolerance through that level of, like, let's say pornography, right? So if pornography is not a diagnosable issue in the DSM-5, then how do we know that it qualifies for an addiction? Because you look at tolerance, right? What I've noticed is with most people that come in and get help for pornography addictions and use like that, is that the amount of time now has to increase, right? The viewing of certain images no longer do the trick, and so you have to get a little bit deeper into some of the darker stuff. And the tolerance means that now instead of maybe spending 5 minutes online, you're now at 5 hours, and things start to increase. And that's why I think they need to take a serious look at it again when they revamp it again and dive into some issues with behaviors and addictions, because that is a huge component. The withdrawal means when it's gone, you feel that physical need to fill the void. Yeah. And pornography, eating, substance abuse, they all kind of fit that mold, right? So the biggest thing you can indicate beyond the cravings and the compulsive behavior is definitely the tolerance level of whatever substance or behavior you're pursuing. Yeah. And then what do you feel like when you stop? Do you feel like I can't do this without that? Yeah. Right?
Because you're feeling some lower depression, maybe some more anxiety when you can't have the substance or behavior.
Yeah. And so then the next level we look at is neglecting your responsibilities. This is where other people start to notice. This is like where people start pointing out things, prioritizing an addictive behavior over an important obligation, right? Oh, yeah. Where you're kind of like, putting off work or school or relationships or
making excuses not to go out with friends or do things that you used to do because you want to engage in that.
Yeah. And so parents, this is where you'll start to notice, like, hey, I'm noticing that you're not as involved, or you're not hanging out with your friends, or you're starting to fail your classes, all these things. And a lot of times, parents, we can write this stuff off. We can be like, well, that's just typical teenage behavior, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be a little bit more, I guess, investigating the source and the reasons why. And that's a big deal. That's not something to be overlooked.
Yeah.
So this is where people start pointing out, hey, I'm noticing a few things and neglecting your responsibilities. We talked about this last night in the meeting. If you want to be a world-class addict, you have to sacrifice something on the other end, right? Even if you want to be a recreational, marijuana smoker, alcohol, consumption, whatever. And I know that I catch a lot of flack for this, but if you're going to do that, you're going to sacrifice something else. Meaning, if you're going to stay home and knock back a few beers and smoke a couple bowls, whatever, then you're also giving up the opportunity if a kid needs you. Hey, Daddy, you can pick me up. Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, it can't.
Or just being really there.
Or being emotionally available. Yeah. And if you're cool with that, hats off, go for it. It's a free country. You get to do what you get to do.
Yeah.
But you have to always sacrifice something. It's like we talked about this yesterday as well. If you want to be a world-class athlete and you want to be the best of the best, you're going to have to sacrifice something on the other side. Any professional athlete that says that they are all in it for family and social and, professional sports, they're lying. They can't be. Something has to give.
To be on that level of a pro athlete, you have to put a lot of percentage of your time and energy into practice and just shaping who you are. So other things may lose out, but that's with any behavior.
And there's nothing wrong with that. If the people that are involved in your life are cool with it too. Right? I mean,
any behavior. Let's even just look at, one of my we were talking about priorities last night. One of our priorities is that we have a nice, good looking yard. Okay. So that means we have to take time out of maybe recreation or sitting and watching a TV show to do yard work.
Yeah.
Because that is what we find is important because we have that priority. So other things lose out. And if you can assess that as you go throughout the day and whatever it is and say, I'm okay giving up these other things for it, then great. That's what you have to do. But you have to be able to recognize that you lose something in turn. So if you're looking at addiction and you're looking at like the things that you have in your life, most of the time you're going to be neglecting other responsibilities, relationships, interactions with people, and then possibly even something bigger where you start, losing out on jobs or school time or homework or, a lot of other
absolutely.
Extra things.
Yeah, 100%. And so when you look at that neglecting of responsibilities, that's when other people start poking around and noticing, and this is where your defense mechanisms typically start to pop up. But the next stage in this is if you're noticing that you're losing control, meaning like, and control is kind of a funny word, but you're kind of losing your grip, because daily setting, the difficulty setting limits to like, sticking to boundaries related to those addictive behaviors, they lead to the excessive use and kind of the engagement of finding it. Yeah. You're now noticing that instead of going to your kids, dance recital, you're hitting the liquor store or going to hang out with, your buddy that usually can score you something, or you're hungover, and so you can't get up and do the things that you plan to do. You're starting to lose control. You're starting to slip at work. You're starting to slip at school. You're losing control of all.
And
of
some of that control are things that you don't even recognize that you're not being able to make the choices that you used to because you're automatically going to that negative behavior or negative substance, because that's where that tolerance and withdrawal has increased, and so you're seeking out that more than other things.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see this a lot in like the physicality of how you dress and your appearance and those kind of things. Like you just stop caring because you're so focused on the substance, the pursuit of
seeking the substance or behavior. Yep.
Yeah, and obviously it's going to start interfering with your daily life, and when the addiction begins to kind of negatively impact your various aspects of life, relationships, physical health, mental well-being, financial stability, you're going to start noticing that you'll have less than. You'll start creating this scarcity kind of a lifestyle.
Yeah. I've always said when people start using a substance or compulsive negative behaviors, that doesn't start in like math class or in the middle of a shift at work. It always starts in your leisure time and when you have extra time. And so when you start using a substance or, engaging in like compulsive behaviors, all of a sudden that starts growing to the point that it's then causing problems in school, like you say, in the daily life. And it starts engulfing the entire day, where it started in leisure free time. And then soon you're late to work or you're not getting homework done. And all of a sudden all the daily things you're used to doing start falling to the wayside.
Which is awesome. I think we can do a whole show and a podcast, which maybe we'll do for this Monday, talking about leisure time. Because if you think about it, listeners, the leisure that you have, you're right. Addiction doesn't start when you're busy. Mm-hmm. It starts when you've ran out of ideas to keep yourself occupied during free time.
Yeah.
I mean, every time. So let's definitely dive deep into that, because I think there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah.
And when it starts to kind of have an impact on kind of like escalating and you become preoccupied with the thoughts of the substance, of the behavior, you spend a significant amount of time and energy and resource thinking about the addiction, trying to pursue those behaviors, planning for it.
How often during the day do you think of doing that?
Exactly.
Does it start to engulf all of your thinking and mind all the time?
Yeah. Or even recovering from the effects of it, right? Because we forget about that like there's so much that you're doing that you also have this other side of the coin, which is the come down.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of preoccupied with, I can't be feeling withdrawal because I have X, Y, and Z to do. And so your mind just becomes superimposed on how in the world do I get through the day to get the money, to get the resources, to get the time, to get the availability, to get the substance, to, all these things.
Yeah.
It's for any addiction or any compulsion. I think that becomes problematic.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. It just becomes, I look at it like tar. It's just it usually starts out really slow and it just starts oozing, but it just engulfs and encapsulates everything around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so those are some signs that maybe you've got an issue with an addiction and a behavior that needs to be addressed. So what do you do with that?
Yeah. I mean, now that maybe you've identified there's something that is out of control, what do you do now?
And this is always the hardest thing. I have such admiration for anyone that decides to take a knee on the addiction and really fight it for all it's worth. Mm-hmm. And I'm a firm believer that anyone that overcomes an addiction can accomplish absolutely anything in life.
Yeah.
It is one of the most challenging things you'll ever do, because it's a biological, it's a mental, it's a physical, it's spiritual, it's an emotional.
Yeah, it connects to every part.
It really does. And so first and foremost, this is that you could call it the first step or whatnot, but you look at acknowledging the addiction itself, recognizing and accepting that you in fact have an addiction.
Yeah.
Because self-awareness is the very first, step you got to take in order to start developing a foundation of recovery.
100%. Yeah.
So, there's a difference between Addict to Athlete's philosophy and what the common, statement is out there about being powerless over it. Yeah. And I don't believe that you're powerless over it. I think you have a lot more power than you think you do. Mm-hmm. I understand the premise of the first step, right? Because admitting it, again, is acknowledging it, and that's important.
Yeah.
And I think that they tag the powerlessness onto that to show how strong you could potentially become. Mm-hmm. But I also don't think that you should stay in that camp for very long. I think the minute that you recognize it and you give it a name, right?
That's when you take away the power of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do. And so that to me is the essence of what power stands for. But your awareness, and I've seen this, these are usually the aha moments people have. And I love listening to the pivot points in people's recovery where this aha moment occurs, where they start looking at the bigger picture. Yeah. My kids aren't coming over. My house looks like a trap house. My relationships suck. My bank account's crazy. I've got court dates and all kinds of stuff going on.
I've been missing, and yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, I love what Brock Bevel talks about in the Agents of Recovery podcast when he talks about how deep he was in his opiate addiction until the one day he, shut the mirror in his bathroom and he could see in his reflection the home that he was living in.
Behind him. Yeah.
And he thought to himself, is this really what I've become?
Mm-hmm.
And that was his acknowledge that I have an addiction.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Then you got to educate yourself. And this is hard because none of us want to spend the time. We want it gone now.
Yeah.
Why would educating yourself about what's going on be so important? Not just for you, the person struggling with addiction, but the people around you.
Because you have to understand what you're fighting, right? If you don't know what you're up against, then that's like fighting blindly, like no one's going to put on blindfold and just go out punching.
Yeah.
If you do, you're going to be losing a lot of energy on something maybe in the wrong direction and, and just tiring yourself out. So if you can identify and be able to educate yourself on what it is, what effects you're having, where is your psychological, and some of that education is also correlates with your self-awareness.
Yeah.
Being able to educate, okay, now this is tolerance and this is withdrawal, and where am I building that tolerance? Where am I noticing when I get stressed, I immediately think of going and eating a brownie.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do, I feel a little bit better. It didn't fix the problem, but I feel a little bit better. So you have to pay attention to your inner urges and cues and what you're doing and thinking.
And this is why I love working with people in addiction recovery, because the nature of addiction tries to hide your true self from you, right? And its effects on your physical, your mental, all those aspects of life, it kind of makes you forget who you are. There's a core issue that I've noticed that everyone develops that feeds the addiction. And the hardest part about this is distinguishing the difference between what you feel about your addiction versus what you think about your addiction. And I'm a proponent that your addiction is a thought process issue. It's the way that you think. It's the lies that you bought into as a kid, as a young adult, that convinced you that you're less than. Mm-hmm. And you have this core issue. And I've noticed that most addictions, believe it or not, boil down to two very significant core issues. One is abandonment, feelings of abandonment and issues of abandonment. The other one is neglect. Yeah. And if either of those become present in your life, chances are you're going to have fuel for an addiction later in life, because neglect and abandonment, what I've noticed, are the two most potential risk factors in addiction. Yeah. So what does it mean? Yeah. You look at it this way. Abandonment means that maybe you were born into a family with divorce and dad walks away and mom's struggling and all those things, right? Or
maybe you're taken away by the state. In foster care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All kinds of issues, right? Or maybe, you felt abandoned, even if your family was perfect and everything was great, right? Like you just felt like, man, I'm always the one that's kind of getting left behind. I feel like I was, adopted at birth. Yeah.
Forgotten.
The more severe core issue I've noticed is neglect. And neglect is a bugger, because neglect can happen in the most beautiful of homes. It can happen in the most high-functioning homes, because it's the way that you interpret it. Neglect is that the love is present, but it's never shown. It's like you think it exists, but like it's never given. It's kind of like
some gaslighting going on.
And this happens a lot. I told this last night in the meeting again. It's like I have had so many people come through my office that said my dad was just never there. And they can't get mad at their dad because the dad was working and he was doing all these things, providing.
Yeah.
But when they needed him, he was gone. And mom could only handle so much. And so there's these feelings of abandonment and neglect that fuel these core issues. And when you try to educate yourself, you have to go to the core of it. Now, the hard part about educating yourself, Marissa, is that most people want to come in and say, well, my parents were the salt of the earth. They didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They may not be the reason of your addiction, but they have some stewardship in it.
Yeah.
And so many people are afraid to talk about the scary, heavy, hard things in parenting and childhood because they love their parents.
Well, and that's
good.
That may not have been the parents' intent.
Of course not.
And most of the time it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But again, any trauma, any situation, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's how you interpreted, how you perceived the situation or perceived the interaction that you had, or, even just situation at school and being teased, all of a sudden you take it as being shame and guilt and such deep embarrassment, even though to others it may look like a lighthearted, not a big deal issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. Educating yourself about your addictions is one of the coolest things because you start to see the patterns and the problems and the solutions that can exist. But it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of time and a lot of investment. And most people that struggle with addictions don't like putting themselves first. That sounds kind of silly, right? It's like, well, your addiction is very selfish.
Yeah.
But you got to understand why people, and again, the world according to Blue, there's things I've noticed. I've noticed that most people that struggle with addiction, they're covering the pain and something deep down hurts. And it has to usually do with one of those two issues, right? Neglect or abandonment. And so if they find something finally that fills the void of pain, and then you're saying, hey, you're a lowlife because you're using that kind of stuff, that just adds to the pain. But you also have to understand that people with addictions and people in recovery, they have the biggest hearts that walk the face of this earth because they'll take your trauma and your drama and your pain without, giving you any. And so they'll take the criticism you give them and they'll take the pain that they've established and
they're there to give you the shirt off their back.
Absolutely.
If you're the one struggling. Yeah.
It is one of the craziest things. A lot of these folks in addiction are loyal to a fault. And you think, well, yeah, loyal to the addiction. Yeah, because they're carrying around significant pain. And now we're saying, you hurt? Well, tough nuts. I guess you're going to have to, go ahead and quit.
Yeah.
So that's where the erase and replace philosophy comes in an addict athlete we'll talk about sometime. But you can't do this by yourself.
Yeah.
You've got to seek some kind of help, and be particularly picky on who you're picking to help you professionally.
Yeah.
Don't just jump into treatment center number one. Make sure that you're doing your homework and your research. Make sure that you're seeing that you're doing daily groups, you're doing it one-on-one, you're doing family.
Yeah.
You have a treatment plan. You have all these things that are going to necessitate a foundation of success for you. Brace yourself for impact when it comes to the price tag of some of this stuff. So my humble advice would be start something like developing a support network. Whether it's addict to athlete, whether it's 12-step, whether it's something that can start holding you accountable.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go into residential. Sometimes you have to go into detox.
Yeah.
But you've got to build a sober support system or else you're going to have nothing even when you get out.
So you're going to look into some kind of professional help, but that can also be a therapist you're seeing weekly or bi-weekly. It doesn't have to be, residential 24-hour a day care. That may be necessary, but it's not always required. So that's where, you acknowledging and educating yourself and what do you have and what do you need? That's where you need to start.
Yeah. And I kind of mentioned this just moments ago about building your own treatment plan. Whenever you go to any kind of therapist, residential, IOP, whatever, you're going to get a treatment plan if they're good programs, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to want to see that. But you can develop your own treatment plan as well. You can work with your healthcare provider. You can work with your family. You can work with your doctors. You can work with groups. You can work with lots of folks to help establish a treatment plan. On Addict to Athlete, we call it your personal game plan, right? It's going to have all the ins and outs of the people that you need on your team, the things you're going to hold yourself accountable to, stuff you're going to show up for, things you're going to erase, and what you're going to replace them for.
That playbook of
it's creating your own recovery playbook. And if you need more information on the Addict to Athlete Recovery Playbook for your own specific needs, give us a holler because you can do this. And so your own treatment plan or your own, playbook to recovery is going to be crucial because if you're going into it just hoping you'll catch something with a few meetings that you have every week, that may not be enough. You got to have a plan.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yep.
And then you got to be willing to make some lifestyle changes. And this is the hard part.
Yeah.
Because when you erase the addiction, you have to replace it with something of greater value, meaning you have to replace feeling that loss of care, that loss of pain, that loss of hurt, that covering of trauma and grief. You have to be willing to cover that with something better. And that something better kind of comes at a price because there's this little period in between that's very uncomfortable. And I talk about this, and it's always kind of a gross thing. So if you're listening to this towards lunch, I'm sorry. But it's like coming to a doctor's office with a very horribly infected wound. Maybe you got something on your arm or your leg, right? And you just put the Band-Aid on it, you wrapped it up, and you thought, I'll take care of that later.
But you didn't get it
Yeah.
really.
And it's sore, you notice it, but you keep covering it, and so you don't really notice it. But then you stop, and all of a sudden there's this big gashing wound that's oozing all kinds of gross crap and it smells funky.
It's hot, it's inflamed. Yep.
And then the
swelling.
doctor says, well, okay, let's take a check of that. And they unwrap it and they peel it off and it hurts like a mother. And then they start, cutting off all the dead stuff. They start scrubbing it. And oh my gosh, can you imagine the pain? It would hurt so bad.
Yeah.
And they
the antibiotic inside and
oh my gosh,
orally and
Yep.
topically. Yep.
and it hurts. It hurts like a mother. And then they wrap it up and it's sore and you go home and you come back for your next visit a couple of days later. And guess what happens?
They do it again.
They unwrap it. They start doing it again.
Why?
And you're like, oh my gosh, it freaking hurts. And it hurts and it hurts. But eventually what starts to happen as you tend to these wounds? What happens, Marissa?
Starts getting better. You start to heal.
It starts to heal people. Okay.
Yeah.
And there will be a point where it will be completely healed. And you'll be able to identify it by the scar that remains. And here's the funny thing about this kind of stuff. You will no longer be in recovery from this wound. You won't be.
Mm-hmm.
You won't be in recovery from the procedure. It will be healed.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it too is that when you touch those scars and stuff and you forget about them, because after a while you forget they're there. And then you look at me like, oh man, I remember when I got that. That really hurt. That sucked.
That was awful.
You might even touch it. If you've ever touched a scar you got, you can't even really feel it.
Usually
It's
numb.
kind of numb. Yeah. You're like, wow, but you can remember the pain and then you forget about it again. That's like addiction recovery too. I don't like saying that we should be in recovery forever.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to heal. But in order to heal, you've got to be willing to scrub out all the dead, awful, hurty, oozy things in life.
And that may be really changing the full perspective of how you've ever thought. In fact, most of culturally how we think. Oftentimes, we just decades and decades of once an addict, always an addict, that you're screwed for life has become so ingrained in culture, in medical, in social, in everything that we don't even look at it being something we can work through and work beyond.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we can.
So the lexicon also needs to change. Like, I can't imagine breaking an arm and then years later having a son and your son says, Dad, let's go outside and have a catch. But you're like, sorry, son, I'm in recovery from a broken arm in high school.
Yeah. I can
Bullcrap.
only, roll it to you a little bit.
Yeah,
here
I
and
can
there.
kick it to you.
Got to be careful.
But here's the deal. It's a very unflattering, unsexy metaphor when you start saying that you can heal from addiction, because that means there'll be points in time where you don't need us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a bad thing, right? You can use us as a resource while you need us, but then you got to go out there and be a free agent to life, and you've got to be able to step up to the plate. And you can know where, if you need a little coaching, if you need a little therapy, you know where to come.
Yeah. When things come up.
But you can heal from this. And
That also means you're going to probably need all new friends, a new environment, possibly,
a complete change.
a complete change. Maybe you need to even do what we call social suicide or a social detox, and changing from the way you look, the way you dress, the thing you listen to. Like, what do you need to change to be able to shift your whole thinking? Does that happen for everybody or need to? No. I've also seen, we've had many clients that didn't do that. And then a year, 2, 3 years later, they're like, I don't need this, tongue ring or this piercing or
Yeah.
some of these external things that you used to tie into your identity. And I don't want them. And starting to let those things go.
I remember that.
Become
I remember
somebody
when I made that decision to commit that social suicide, where I walked away from all my social aspects, the friends, the situations, the places. I left them behind. I walked away from everything and everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucked for a while. I mean, again, I talk about this all the time. My friends were Monica and Chandler and Ross and all those guys on Friends, because that was who I hung out with. But I remember driving and taking the earrings out, throwing them out the window in my Jeep. I remember, gathering all my CDs of the music I listened to and thinking I can make a lot of money if I sell these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have back then, because they don't even make them anymore, right? But I remember thinking, why do I want to give somebody else the opportunity to toxify themselves with this stuff when it brought such chaos in my life? I just remember throwing them away, just dumping them in the garbage, hundreds of dollars worth of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's that social detox. It's taking away all that stuff. And so making lifestyle changes are huge.
Huge.
And then, of course, you've got to stay committed. this is the hard part too, because once you start feeling amazing and great and all the aha stuff is happening and people are so rah cheering behind you, pretty soon you're going to plateau.
At some point, life just goes back to, quote, normal. And when you've struggled with an addiction for so long, I believe a lot of what you're addicted to is the lifestyle of it. It's the seeking out of the substance behavior, not specifically the use and the exact high, but it's the life of chaos. It's everything is just chaotic and out of control. And sometimes that piece of calm in a quote normal life seems and feels so boring and dull and dumb and such a waste of time. But that's also where you have to, most serotonin dumps from any substance behavior addiction is going to tell your body that that's normal, which is clear up here. And because of your tolerance level, it just keeps going higher when really you need to let your body reset to normal, get some homeostasis back so your body can start regulating happiness and goodness in your life, which takes so much time.
Takes some time.
Heal. A lot of substances, 18 months to 24 months, even longer, possibly.
Yep.
So hold on and try new things. As you try new things,
you
can create some of that other new serotonin and dopamine dumps in new different ways to improve your life.
Yeah, trying new things is crucial. That's why Addict Athlete works so well. It's about getting yourself out of your comfort zone and doing something new and celebrating a different chapter. So, you know what? It takes a lot of courage to take on any addiction. It takes a lot of willingness to be teachable. And we got lots of resources. Jump on addict2athlete.org and you'll find all kinds of resources on how to help start, approach your starting line, I should say. Yeah. And so, guys, it's one of these issues that we kind of forget that there's some basics that we need to talk about from time to time. So I appreciate the comment that came in this week about talking about how do I even know if I am, and if I am, what do I do?
Yeah, what do I do?
And that's kind of a blueprint to help out. Get your personal playbook going.
Yeah. Find new friends, social, sober support, somebody that, people that will be honest with you, may not exactly tell you everything you want to hear.
Or maybe they will.
You can tell that there's some real love and care and concern.
Absolutely. So listeners, again, this will be rebroadcast as a podcast later this week. So again, share this with anyone that you might be having conversations with that are in that same kind of questioning period of, do I have and what do I do if?
Leave us a review, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Thank you to all of our listeners.
Yeah, and you can find us on addict2athlete.org if you need more information on the coaching program, or if you need just additional help, you can find all of our links there.
Yep.
So until next time, athletes, do your best to turn your mess into your message.